I'm a female noob, or known in-game as We All Live Together.mp3. This is my beginner's guide to Eidolons. It will go over basics such as amp crafting and the steps to do in order to kill and capture Eidolons. It will also cover the frames that you can take to Eidolon battles in a great deal of depth. This video will not be covering advanced 5x3 tactics, but I am in the process of making one that does, so be on the lookout for that one. I'm making this guide because although there are hundreds of Eidolon guides out there, most of them only tell you what to do, not why you're doing it. So I'll try to explain the reasoning behind the Eidolon meta, as well as shortcuts that a beginner will be able to take, since they may not have access to as many resources as somebody who has more experience with these Eidolon battles. Heads up alert, Eidolons are only accessible to players who have completed the story mode questline The War Within. In fact, if you have not done the second dream, please don't watch this video as it will contain massive spoilers for that storyline. First things first, when it comes to Eidolons, they are only available during the night cycle of the Plains of Eidolon. The Eidolon will despawn once dawn rises by heading to the nearest body of water and sinking into it, so do be mindful of that. You'll see them wandering around along with Vombolists, which will also despawn once dawn rises. These tiny sentients are really annoying for new players because they can only be killed by operator beams, which leads us to the very first thing you need in order to be able to kill Eidolons, an amp. After you complete the War Within, you go to Cetus, start at Consut, and head this way, or alternatively, you can fast travel here. You will come across a mysterious door. This will only open if you push 5 and go into operator mode. Speak to the Quill and he will give you the Moat Amp for free. This amp is a direct upgrade to your current Void Beam. However, compared to all the other amps in the game, it is ridiculously underpowered. Now, there used to be only one path you could take, and that would be going out on the plains at night and killing Vombolists, which drop intact sentient cores, which you turn into the Quill to rank up. Besides crafting Revenant, this is the only use of sentient cores. Each time you rank up with the Quill, you will have access to a different tier of amp pieces, which you could use to craft amps, mixing and matching the parts from different tiers to customize it. There are 3 different pieces in the amp: the Prism, which controls the primary fire of the amp, or the left mouse button, the Scaffold, which controls the alt fire, or the mouse wheel button, and the Brace, which gives a passive bonus to the amp. These parts are referred to by their tier, so the amp made from the 3 parts you get when first ranking up with the Quill is called the 111 amp, since it is the first tier. The second path you can take in crafting amps is going to Fortuna. If you push 5 in front of Little Duck in the back room, you will have access to her amps, which you can buy with Vox Solaris standing. There are 2 ways of getting Vox Solaris standing. The first is by doing Orb Mother bounties. However, in order to do this, you do need to be at max standing with normal Solaris United, which is a daunting task for beginners, which is why I would suggest Toroid farming instead. With a well-built farming team, a resource booster, and a Kavat, I have been able to get over 100 Calda Toroids in 20 minutes, so that might be a better option for people who would rather not max out Solaris United standing. The funny thing about Little Duck's amps is that the first tier you unlock with her is called the 555 amp, since there are 4 Cetus amp tiers. Before you're able to hunt Eidolons, you will either need to make the 111 amp at Cetus or the 555 amp at Fortuna. Although technically you can kill a Terrorist with a Moat amp, it will take like the entire night cycle to do so, since it's so weak compared to literally any other amp. So these 2 amps that I just mentioned are good for people who are just getting started and are trying to kill 1, maybe 2 Terrorists a night. However, once you start racking up the Eidolon kills and you want to advance onto the Gauntlist and Hydralist, you will need to move on to the meta amps. Here there are 3 options to take, the first being the X23 amp. The X in the Prism slot means that you can bring any Prism you want because you're not going to be using the Prism in the Eidolon battles. The Scaffold is the Tier 2 Scaffold, and that is the alt fire that we will be spamming on the Eidolon. On top of having a high crit chance, it'll also hit the Eidolon twice. The Lauren Brace, the Tier 3 Brace, increases the crit chance and status chance. The second meta amp you can craft is actually much better than the X23, and this is the X27, 7 being the Brace for the 3rd tier of Little Duck's amps. The Certus Brace increases the crit chance. And the last of the meta amps that you can build is the X77 amp. This one is a little better than the X27 amp, although it is slightly more challenging to play. Either one is fine though, the X27 or the X77. Once you reach level 30 with your amp, bring it back to Cetus to gild it, as this will increase its stats pretty well. Please note that as of right now, gilding the X27 amp at Little Duck will cause it to bug out, and it will not give you the brace effects, so be sure to take it to Onko to gild it instead of to Little Duck. Enough about amps, let's move on to how exactly to kill Eidolons. There are 3 Eidolons: the Terrorist, which is the one you will see wandering the plains, the Gauntlist, and the Hydralist. You can only access the other 2 after first capturing the Terrorist. All Eidolons start out invulnerable to all Warframe abilities and weapon damage. The only way to damage it is with the Operator Fire, thus the importance of amps. Amp Fire will strip the Eidolon's shields, and once those are gone, the Eidolon will flash red and become vulnerable to weapons, but only in specific spots, in its synovias. For the Terrorist, these are located on its biceps and knees, and for the Gauntlist and Hydralist, they are on their biceps, knees, and shoulders. The best way to take these synovias out is with a sniper rifle. The absolute best one for Eidolons is the Lanka, with the Rubico and Rubico Prime coming in 2nd place, but if you're just starting out, any sniper rifle is fine. Sometimes after dropping the shields, a Vombalist will link itself to the Eidolon, and as long as it stays attached to it, it will charge up its shield, so take care of it as soon as you can. Similarly, in the Hydralist battle, if you happen to see a swirling purple portal labeled a Vombalist Bloom, kill it as fast as possible. Once the synovias are shattered, the Eidolon will collapse and let out a scream. This scream will do loads of damage, on top of giving your frame a magnetic proc. So if you don't have a frame to counter this, the best coercive action is to go into operator mode, and then enter void mode by pushing the crouch button. While it is screaming, and during the animation where it falls and stands back up, it is invulnerable, so you might as well save your ammo. Once it's standing again, its shields will refill with a flash of blue, so the operators will need to chip away at its shields again before they can break the next synovias. Once all the synovias are broken, instead of screaming, the Eidolon will fall on its back and begin summoning Vomvalists that are glowing green. If these Vomvalists touch the Eidolon's body, they will heal it, so take out as many as you can. After the Vomvalist call phase, when the Eidolon stands back up, it will now be vulnerable to weapon fire anywhere on its body, so headshot it with your sniper rifles. Once its health is depleted, it will crumble into a pile of bones, drop some loot for you, and die. Congratulations! You just killed your first Eidolon! However, this is the least efficient way of killing Eidolons, because since it was killed, not only did it drop less loot, it didn't drop an item needed to summon the next stage of the battle. On top of this, one thing I have failed to mention is the fact that each time after the Eidolon screams, instead of standing back up, it will teleport to a random body of water on the map. Both of these issues are solved with Eidolon lures. Lures can be found at most Grineer camps across the plains at night, and can be charged with Vomvalists. You damage a lure until its health is gone, then hack it. Ciphers will make this much faster. Once it's hacked, it will follow you around until you tell it to stay, which will allow anybody in your squad to pick it up. Kill the corporeal Vomvalists near it, and it will absorb their ghostly mode that activates. If you accidentally kill a Vomvalist and you need to charge lures, don't worry, they will drop charges. When you pick one up, you'll glow blue, and touching a lure will transfer the charge to it. Once it absorbs 3 Vomvalists, its icon on the minimap will turn from yellow to blue, to show that it is now charged. This charged lure can now tether itself to the broken synovias, preventing teleportation, and if there are enough when it dies, it will capture it. Since the Terrorist has 4 synovias, the Gauntless and Hydralist have 6 synovias. This means that you will need 2 charged lures to capture the Terrorist, and 3 lures for the Gauntless and Hydralist. Keep in mind that each time an Eidolon is captured, the lures tethering it are destroyed, so make sure before starting the next stage that you have at least 1 charged lure to prevent the Eidolon from teleporting. The rest can be easily charged during the Vomvalist call phases. Also, keep in mind that the attacks from the Eidolon can and will damage the lures, so if one dies and you don't have enough to capture the Eidolon, you'll need to fetch more. This is more an issue with the Gauntless and Hydralists, since the Terrorist attacks are generally not really enough to kill the lures. After killing the Terrorist, in order to summon the Gauntless, take the sentient shard obtained from the captured Terrorist to the little shrine on the island in the middle of Garatot Lake. The prompt insert shard will appear, and once all members of the party have put theirs in, the Gauntless will be summoned. After capturing the Gauntless, repeat the same process to get to the Hydralist. Killing one set of 3 Eidolons in a night is called a 1x3. If you re-enter Cetus and go back out, it will reset the Eidolons, allowing you to do a 2x3, and so on. Note that although Kanzu offers Eidolon bounties, these don't actually offer a reward, and you don't need to accept one in order to fight the Eidolons. Squads formed with recruiting chat can load directly into the planes, or if you prefer not to go through the hassle of recruitment, the bounties will match you up with 3 random team members. This is the bare bones basic that you'll need to know for capturing Eidolons. Moving on, we'll be talking about team composition. Now, instead of telling you to only ever bring the meta frames, I will instead tell you the different roles that each teammate performs and how those roles relate to the meta frames. I'll share how to play the meta frames, but I'll also share some non-meta ones that might be better for players who are just learning and want to practice. By the way, all of the modding for the 4 meta frames that I will be showing is taken from a Google Docs written by Bleakord and Lotus Eater, which is an amazing resource for advanced Eidolon hunters. They do have a lot of tips for people who are trying to get that 5x3 down. I will be linking that in the description, and I highly suggest you check it out. A few of the builds are by YouTuber Sapmatic, and I'll link the videos I got them from in the description. A lot of his videos cover fine-tuning your Eidolon gameplay, and I'd recommend checking him out. So the 4 roles for Eidolons are Damage Preventer, Lure Babysitter, Damage Dealer, and Volt. Honestly, I can't think of anything to replace him, and if you didn't start with him, you can build him in your clan's Tenno lab. The Damage Prevention is the easiest role, but it's also the hardest Warframe to get if you go by the meta pick of Harrow. The Harrow's job is to activate his Covenant, in other words push 4, right after a Synovia is broken to protect Warframes from the damaging magnetic scream. Covenant makes all party members in range invincible, and the damage absorbed is converted to a crit buff with extra damage given to headshots. The buff will apply to the whole party, including the damage dealer, thus letting you squeeze a little bit more oomph out of your snipers. Despite how good this sounds, for beginners, I would actually recommend Limbo, or Limbo Prime, instead as the damage prevention role. Let me explain why. The reasoning hinges on how his rifts work. When you put down Cataclysm, his 4, the bubble stops all projectiles from entering or leaving the rift, meaning somebody on the outside firing in will deal no damage to those inside. But if they walk into the rift, since the borders of the bubble are not stopping the bullets, both parties can now hurt each other. These rules, however, don't apply to operators. Operators always act as if they are outside the rift and ignore the bubble's boundaries completely. Meaning, if an operator in the rift fires at an enemy in the rift, they will deal no damage to it. However, an operator in the rift firing at an enemy outside the rift will be able to damage the enemy. Again, because the operator is always outside the rift. The way this applies to Eidolon battles is that the Eidolons, because they are so huge and because they're bosses, they will always act as if they're always outside the rift. Meaning a Warframe standing inside the rift will not be damaged by most of the Eidolon's attacks, even if the operator can still be injured by them. So, in order to play an effective damage negator as Limbo, put up a max range, max duration bubble right on top of the Eidolon. You'll have to move it around to follow him, but the duration keeps the bubble from shrinking too quickly. Stasis, year 2, will only affect the Vombalists, so doing it during the call phase might be helpful for you and your team to prevent the Eidolon from healing. You'll want to keep the Cataclysm up at all times, except for when the Eidolon flashes red to signify that his shields are down. Once you see this, immediately pop the bubble and keep it down until the Synovia is broken, otherwise you won't be able to break the Synovia. Once it breaks, immediately recast it and keep it up until the shields drop again, repeating this all the way to the end of the Vombalist call phase. Once the call phase is over, leave it popped. The second Harrow replacement is Oberon. His set of skills aren't quite as impressive as Limbo or Harrow, but regardless he can still help out quite a bit. When the Eidolon goes to do his magnetic scream, you'll need to cast his 2, Hallowed Ground, and mark its location for your teammates. Make sure you give them enough time to get to it before the scream. Hallowed Ground will not prevent damage, but it will prevent the magnetic proc from affecting any Warframes standing on it, even Warframes that don't currently have an operator. The tactic here is to park your Warframe on the grass and go into operator, then void mode until the scream is over. When you re-enter your Warframe, you should still have the same amount of energy as when you left it, instead of being drained by the magnetic proc. Do keep in mind that the shape of Hallowed Ground is not a complete circle, and try to aim it towards your teammates. Once you do the Terrorist enough times, chances are it will start dropping arcane nullifiers, which, if you get enough of them, can do the same thing as Oberon's too, rendering him only really useful for people who don't have that arcane. Oberon is also useful for his 3, especially if you have the Syndicate mod Phoenix Renewal. You can get this mod from Steel Meridian and New Loga. If a person dies while under the influence of your 3 and you have Phoenix Renewal equipped, instead of dying, they will regain some health and be invincible for a short amount of time. Even if you don't have the mod, Renewal is still good for keeping your teammates alive via extra armor, healing over time, and prolonging their bleed out time, as long as you don't have like negative strength on your build. He is also good for keeping the lures alive for the Terrorist, although once you get to the Gauntless and Hydralist, his 3 won't be able to keep up as much with the massive amounts of damage these things dish out. I mean, it is doable, but it is also quite stressful. That leads us to our second role, the Babysitter. The meta frame for this role is Trinity or Trinity Prime. A lot of new players ended up with Trinity Prime on account of the Twitch Prime giveaways, but regardless of which frame you bring, the person will need to go around collecting lures. The number needed changes depending on how many Eidolons you plan to take down, such as if you're just doing the Terrorist, you only need 2. If you're planning on doing a 1x3 or a full set of 3 Eidolons, it is easier to get all 8 lures at the beginning rather than looking for more after each Eidolon is killed. Getting lures at the beginning will also mean that most of them are charged during the Terrorist's Vomulus call phase, meaning you'll never have to worry about the subsequent Eidolons teleporting away. The reason Trinity is the optimal pick for the lure grabber is because of her 4, Bless. This will restore the health and shields of all allies and lures within range, and will give them all damage resistance. The range of this power is always affinity range, so checking that will let you know who benefits from it. Trinity will be spamming her Bless, especially during the Gauntless and Hydralist battles, where the lures can take massive damage. As a rule of thumb, try to always keep the damage resistance active, so if it's about to run out, even if nobody is injured, recast it to keep that effect. It is worth noting that you do not want to bring an EV or Energy Vampire build. These have a low duration, which messes with the Bless's damage reduction, and moreover, you will not be casting your 2 at all. Here is why. These are energy pads. The blueprint for small ones can be bought from the market, medium ones can be bought from your clan's energy lab, and large ones can be bought from Perrin's Sequence and Arbiters of Hexus. I highly recommend building as many of whichever version you can afford and binding them to a hotkey from your gear wheel. Personally, I use 6 for energy pads and 7 for Archqueen launchers. You can have a max of 200 in each size per mission, but don't worry, you won't be using quite that many per Eidolon run. Whenever you're low on energy, drop a pad. Whenever your operator is about to decloak and you're in the middle of a giant AoE attack, drop a pad. If you only have small energy pads, spam 5 or 6 of them, one after the other. You'll be going through energy like candy, and it is much more convenient for you and effective for your team to spam pads rather than mess up your Trinity's build. Energy pads are not a necessity if you're only taking down the Terrorist. However, they will make your runs so much smoother. You don't want your team to wipe because the Harrow is out of energy to cast his 4. The only real replacement for Trinity is Oberon or Oberon Prime for his 3, and as stated before, he does struggle a bit during the Gauntless battle, so proceed with caution. The third role is the damage dealer. Here, Chroma is king on account of his Vex armor, his 3. The way this works is he will gain Fury for damage dealt to his health, which translates to a damage buff for his weapons. This power is nice because if you recast it while it's still active, it refreshes the timer without losing the buff. The most reliable way of activating this is through self-damaging secondaries, such as the Hiku or Hiku Prime with concealed explosives, or glaive weapons. Both of these options can be thrown at your feet to trigger the Fury status once they deal damage to your HP rather than to your shields. The more damage you deal to your health, the bigger the damage buff you will gain. Once the Eidolon's shields go down, the Chroma, or Chroma Prime, will be the main one breaking the limbs. With a well-coordinated team and the right tactics, the damage dealer can one-shot the Synovias without any of the other squad members touching their rifles. For beginners, doing that might be a bit tricky, so it might be best to help out the Chroma with your own sniper rifles. Some replacements for Chroma. Rhino or Rhino Prime is a solid replacement frame, as well as an easy one to get early on. His claim to fame will also be his 3, his Roar, which damage buffs him and any teammates in its range. His Iron Skin, too, will also be extremely helpful for beginners trying to stay alive. The other Chroma replacement is Mesa or Mesa Prime, although not for her 4. Mesa will be casting her 2, Shooting Gallery. Not only does this give Mesa a weapon damage buff, but if any teammates are in operator mode when they receive the Shooting Gallery buff, it will apply to their amps. The ballistic battery charge from her 1 can also be stored and released via the Lanka. The way it works is each shot fired will store a percentage of the damage dealt until the storage reaches capacity. Push 1 again to load the stored damage into the next single shot you make. For 3, the Shatter Shield also increases survivability for reflecting projectiles off her. Octavia is also useful for her amp, or her 4, not to be confused with the operator amps, for the damage boost that her 4 gives. Her 3, Metronome, gives you increased armor based on your strength, and if you shoot in time with the beat, you can gain a 10-second multi-shot buff. Ivara is the last pick for her 4 of Artemis Bow. It is used instead of a sniper rifle, and because of this, you can equip a different primary. The popular pick for this is the Mutilus Quanta, because firing through the orb created by its alt-fire will apply a buff to your bow. Putting the Vigilante mods on it will upgrade your crits as well. Keep in mind that running Ivara without these makes it significantly harder to damage the limbs, especially since you can't build combo on the bow like you can with the sniper rifle. Her 3, Prowl, will give you crit chance on headshots, so cloaking during the final stage when you're shooting the Eidolon's head is always a good idea. You can also break the limbs using your Navigator and Sancti Castanas, however, I would not recommend that for beginners and I won't be going over that here. The final role is that of Volt, who is used for his electric shield, his 3. Quoting directly from the wiki, shots fired through electric shield by Volt and his allies will gain 50% electricity damage, and critical damage will be multiplied by 200%. These stats are not affected by mods. Firing through multiple shields will cause electricity damage to stack additively, e.g. firing through 3 shields will grant a 150% electricity damage bonus. The critical damage bonus, on the other hand, does not stack with additional shields. So in order to best utilize the Volt shields, you'll need to place them where the operators can fire through them at the Eidolons. For the Terralist, placing it between the legs facing up is fine, but for the Gauntless and Hydralist, if you do this, you'll have to add a second shield as a roof to counter the angle of how tall they are. Another option is to stack 2 unangled shields in front of the Eidolon, like so. Try utilizing the aim glide feature while placing the upper one for maximum precision. You'll notice you're only placing 1 layer of shields for the operator. This is because the operators are taking advantage of the crit bonus, not so much the electric damage. Once all the Cenobias are broken, entering the Vomvalist call phase, note which way the Eidolon is facing. Remember, it's flat on its back. And find an elevated spot in clear view of him. Place all 6 of your shields here and mark it for the damage dealer. This is because the Metal Eidolon weapon, the Lanka, deals innate electricity damage, and a properly modded Eidolon sniper rifle will be modded for radiation, which is electricity and heat. Thus, the players firing headshots once the Eidolon stands up will be benefiting from the crit boost and the electric damage boost. If you are missing a mod from your Volt build, you can also slot in the Shock Trooper Syndicate mod from Arbiters of Hexus or Red Veil. Zap your teammates with your 1 during this phase if you have this augment to enable them to deal increased electricity damage. Again, if you are only doing the Terralist and are still in the process of learning, help the damage dealer out by shooting through your shields as well. Alright, that's it for the frames, but it wouldn't do to talk about Eidolons without mentioning the drops. Each destroyed limb will drop an exceptional sentient core, and on killing the Eidolon, a mod will drop, a sentient shard, which can be used for crafting, will drop, and an arcane will drop, which is listed in your mission progress page as an unidentified item. However, when it is captured, not only will the range of possible arcanes increase, you will also get flawless sentient cores and brilliant Eidolon shards, which can be exchanged for focus, along with the chance for an Eidolon Articula. The Gauntless and Hydralist also drop radiant Eidolon shards, and the Hydralist has a chance to drop ribbon transmuters. Each Eidolon has a different drop table of arcanes, with the most valuable ones dropping from a captured Hydralist. Of course, the most important tip I can give anybody is don't be afraid to take it slow and practice on the Terralist as much as you want before flinging yourself into a 1x3. Also keep in mind that although frames like Oberon and Limbo are great for beginners, once you start working your way up to 4x3s or 5x3s, you will be expected to bring the meta frames. They are meta for a reason after all. If you have any questions about anything in this video, please ask me either in the comments or in-game. Again, I will be all left together.mp3. This video was made for the Royal Destiny Alliance. Hopefully it can help newcomers out with their Eidolon hunts. Again, thanks to Bleakord and Lotus Eater for their Eidolon guide, which is posted in the description. Part 2 is coming soon, and that will cover intermediate and advanced tips, ranging from focus schools and arcanes to lure teleporting and forcing Vomvalus spawns. Thank you for watching, and good luck with all your hunts!